Fernando Alonso, really quick again in Jeddah. Aston Martin looks a good car across different circuits, which is encouraging for them. But he made a bit of a mistake on the front row because Charles Leclerc had a penalty. Verstappen couldn't take part in Q3, and he's off to the left-hand side. You can see just on the left part of his tyres there, over the limits of the grid box. Now, we saw this last time out with Esteban Ocon in the Alpine in Bahrain. This is something that the FIA and the stewards are really clamping down on for this season. And for a man that's had the most starts of anyone, this is start 357 for Fernando. It's quite an elementary mistake when you know that the rules are in place as they are, and you know that someone, in fact, in your old team, has just been done for it in the last race. But interestingly, as he's coming up to the line, the drivers want to stay on this arc coming through because it's the clean side of the grid. So you don't want to be just trundling up from the back all the way through there, because you're getting, especially in places like Bahrain or sandy countries or street circuits where you don't have constant track action, you're getting more and more dirt and sand offline. So they don't want to run offline, and that's why they're all doing that. And now if we flick onto Fernando's onboard, you can see he's just pulling over to the left-hand side, and as he does it, he does a big meaty burnout, just making sure those rear tyres are lit up as much as possible. Now his thumb's going to the neutral button. He presses that there on his steering wheel, and it means he's got no way of trying to line up perfectly this grid slot, because he's coming across this penultimate one here, the fourth place grid slot, with a bit of a diagonal, and he's concentrating on pressing his button on the steering wheel and doing his beautiful burnout. So as he comes through here, he straightens up, and now from this point, the driver can't see where he's going right in front of him. So you have a bit of a blind spot out here. So it's actually difficult to see when you're sitting so low where you're looking to line up. And that's why, as he gets closer, you can just see his head, watch his head here as he comes. It's looking now to the right-hand side, and he's waiting for this yellow line, which is put there, it sticks out more from the grid box. It's put there so drivers can get a reference of how far forward or back they are and try and get a gauge on that. But the problem is it doesn't help him try and stay central in his grid box. So he's seen the yellow line, stops on it. Now he can focus on his start procedure, but it's too late. He's just come across the line and he's on the left-hand side. And if we go on board with Carlos Sainz, you can see the difference now in the approach between the two Spaniards. Sainz in fourth, he's on that penultimate grid slot, but look, he's lining it up already with the grid slot just behind him. So he's nicely positioned here. You get more of a gauge by coming from the one behind, even if you have momentary more dust on your tyres. He's not done the last minute burnout that Fernando's done, but he's come through, and now look at his head go to the right-hand side as well, as he's just trying to line it up perfectly. There we go. And it's all good for Sainz. And you can see from here as well that Fernando's clearly on the left of his grid box. Now, really, it doesn't make a big difference to the start. Fernando got a great start, took the lead of the race. That last-minute burnout might have made an iota of a difference, but it's very, very subtle. So it's harsh in many senses. You've just got to prepare it a little bit more this year. And it's the sort of thing in the past that the stewards have just glossed over. You'd say, why is it even a rule that you can't be slightly out to your left or to your right of your grid box? The reason is actually because of something like this. If we look back at 2017, this is a wet race, and I was in it. I remember the fallout afterwards in the driver's briefing room at the next race, where Sebastian Vettel on the front row, ever the intelligent campaigner, was just trying to seek a bit of a gain on a slippery track. And these are the sort of conditions where you can find a little bit of performance by going offline and getting onto some drier patches or away from a puddle. And that is why here Vettel purposefully from the front row took advantage of the rule not really being followed enough. And Charlie Whiting, the race director at the time, didn't deem it worthy enough of sending it to the stewards and giving him a penalty. But Vettel clearly took advantage of it. In dry conditions like Jeddah, makes no difference. It was a small error that really had quite a small consequence in the first place as well for Fernando, because he could take the 5-second penalty. But you need the rule there because you can sometimes find some pretty squiggly grids when drivers, if they can go either side of their grid box, just do it to try and find that dry line. So that's why the rule's there. It makes sense. Fernando, maybe start 358, he'll get it nailed on.
In now comes Fernando Alonso. Will he hold on to second place because he's got that 5-second penalty to serve?
Now, it should have been no deal for Fernando because he had the pace in the Aston Martin to clear 5 seconds to Russell, and he does it. The safety car comes out. That doesn't really make a difference to him taking his penalty at that point either. He takes it, and it all looks okay, apart from there. The rear jack just touches the car, and this was the scene of much contention after the Grand Prix. Rear jackman comes in and just hooks up the car on the jack. Doesn't lift it yet, waits because no one's allowed to touch the car within the 5 seconds whilst Fernando's taking the penalty. You can see everyone else just hovering, but the rear jack has made contact with the car. Now, this was a bit of a confusing one, and it looked a little bit silly at the end of the race when Alonso, 30 odd laps later, has finished on the podium. He's had the ceremony, taken the trophy, and it all looks good for him. And then he gets a penalty. Now, the length of time was a bit silly to get the penalty. Initially, the FIA looked at this and they thought it was all clear. Right at the end of the race, they've looked at it again and seen, oh, actually, maybe the rear jack did touch the car, which it looks like it did. And then they've had no choice but to hand him a penalty. 10 seconds, the same as Esteban Ocon got for not taking the penalty right infringement in Bahrain, and that was for the same initial penalty as well. The difference is Aston Martin could fight this one, and Alpine couldn't. Now, I think the FIA got tipped off by a rival team. That's the only way that this surely would come about right at the end. I'd be surprised if that rival team wasn't Mercedes, who stood to gain a podium from Alonso getting a penalty here. But Aston Martin went to the rule book and they said that actually, whilst the spirit of the rules is that you can't touch the car with the rear jack, you're allowed it with the front jack because it's allowed to guide the car into position. So the front jack is technically is allowed to touch the car. And Aston Martin said, well, there's nothing that stops the rear jack doing that as well in the rules, just the sort of spirit of it and that everyone's raced by. So technically, they were lucky to get away with this one. But in all honesty, they did deserve the podium as well with Alonso. And I think it was the right decision in the end. But it does mean that the FIA are going to have to tighten up that rule book once again because there's been a loophole exposed by Aston Martin. The spirit of the rules and the wording of the rules have got to match up. Otherwise, the F1 lawyers will be on it. And they basically earned Aston Martin the podium here.
Well done, guys. Fantastic. Yeah, well done, Minus. Proper driving, well done. I still need to buy some beers in Australia. Well done, guys. Well deserved.